The Mojave Desert doesn't forgive mistakes. It swallows them whole, buries them under layers of heat and sand and silence, and waits for the next fool to wander into its killing ground. Private First Class Caravas understood this better than anyone standing in the Tactical Operations Center at Fort Irwin National Training Center that morning. She understood it the way a surgeon understands a scalpel, intimately, precisely, with the kind of respect that only comes from knowing exactly how much damage that tool can do in the wrong hands, or the right ones. At 0545 hours, 40 minutes before first light would crack the eastern horizon and turn the sand into a furnace, Voss stood alone at a folding table in the corner of the TOC. The room hummed with activity around her, radio operators calling status checks, officers reviewing route packages, senior NCOs arguing about fuel allocations, but none of that noise touched her. She existed in a bubble of focused silence. Her entire world narrowed to the 18-inch tablet screen, displaying thermal imagery of Canyon Route 7 North. Her eyes moved in a pattern that would have looked random to anyone watching, but was anything but. She scanned left to right, then right to left, then diagonal, then vertical. Each pass caught different details. Each pass added another layer to the three-dimensional map building itself inside her skull. There, kilometer 14, 17 kilometers north of their current position. Voss pulled a greased pencil from her cargo pocket and began sketching on the acetate overlays she'd requisitioned from supply 3 hours earlier. The supply sergeant had looked at her like she was insane. Who uses acetate overlays anymore? But he'd handed them over without argument. Something about the look in her eyes had discouraged questions for shooters. Prepositioned on the east and west canyon walls. She marked them with small X's, then added range fans showing their fields of fire. The geometry was elegant in a brutal sort of way, overlapping kill zones that created a 300-meter corridor of death. Any vehicle moving through that corridor would be engaged from multiple angles simultaneously. Classic L-shaped ambush modified for terrain. But something was wrong. Voss tilted her head, studying the placement of the fourth shooter. 8 meters offset from the expected position. 8 meters closer to the canyon floor than tactical doctrine would suggest. Why? She closed her eyes and let the terrain rebuild itself in her mind. Canyon walls averaging 60 meters high. Talus slopes at 40-degree angles. Limited cover on the floor itself. Wind typically from the northeast at this time of year, which meant her eyes snapped open. Sound corridor. That offset position wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. That shooter wasn't there to provide additional fire. He was there to provide early warning. Anyone moving up the eastern approach would be heard long before they reached effective engagement range. Voss marked the sound corridor with a dotted line, calculated the approximate detection radius at 130 meters, and added a note in her cramped handwriting. Wind shift critical. Monitor bearing. The chain of command hadn't seen this. The operations order hadn't accounted for it. The route reconnaissance photos showed the terrain, but not the tactical reality, and nobody seemed interested in bridging that gap. Nobody except her. If that opening hooked you, stay with me. This story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more real stories of courage, and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment, and tell me where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Cara Voss hadn't always been a private first class. 11 months ago, she'd been a specialist. 11 months ago, she'd been on track for sergeant, with an NCO evaluation report that used words like exceptional and demonstrates mature judgment beyond her years. 11 months ago, she had a future that looked like advancement, leadership, maybe even a career that would make her father proud. Then she'd made a choice. Route Tampa, southern Baghdad. A convoy of 9 vehicles carrying 31 soldiers and 4 civilian contractors had been moving to a logistics hub when the lead MRAP triggered a pressure plate connected to an IED that hadn't detonated. The device, later identified as a 300-pound main charge of homemade explosive mixed with artillery shells, had failed to initiate, but it was still very much armed, very much alive, and sitting directly in the path of the convoy. EOD was 45 minutes out. The convoy was exposed in a known hostile area. Intelligence indicated a secondary attack was being prepared. Standard doctrine said hold position and wait for professionals. Standard doctrine would have gotten people killed. Voss had recognized the device type from her pre-deployment training. She'd recognized the pressure plate configuration and she'd recognized that the heat of the Baghdad afternoon was slowly cooking the degraded initiator toward a state where any vibration, a footstep, an engine rumble, a nearby explosion might complete the circuit. She'd neutralized it herself. 14 minutes of delicate work with multi-tool and hands that refused to shake. 14 minutes of knowing that one wrong move would scatter her atoms across a 100-meter radius. 14 minutes of choosing 35 lives over regulations, careers, and common sense. When EOD finally arrived, they confirmed what she already knew. The device had been approximately 6 minutes from thermal detonation. The convoy would have been cooking off a fresh pot of coffee when the world ended. The Army's response had been swift and predictable. They'd thanked her by reducing her rank, ending her promotion eligibility, and assigning her to a training rotation at the National Training Center, the military equivalent of exile. The message was clear. You saved lives, but you broke the rules, and the rules mattered more. Voss had accepted the punishment without protest. She'd stood at attention while her commander read the charges, nodded when asked if she understood, and saluted when dismissed. Then she'd gone back to her quarters, packed her bags, and reported to Fort Irwin with the same quiet competence that had defined her entire career. She wasn't here for redemption. She wasn't here for vindication. She was here because this was where the Army had told her to be, and she would do her job until they told her it'd be somewhere else. But that didn't mean she would stop thinking. It didn't mean she would stop seeing what others missed. And it didn't mean she would ever stop choosing lives over permission. The sun would rise in 32 minutes. The convoy would roll in 3 hours and 15 minutes. And somewhere in that canyon, for shooters were waiting. Voss picked up her greased pencil and continued her analysis. Major Diana Holt had 23 years in uniform and zero patience for privates who thought they knew better than their superiors. She'd earned her commission the hard way. ROTC scholarship at a state school nobody had heard of, followed by a decade of deployments to places that didn't exist on most maps. She commanded rifle platoons in Afghanistan, intelligence sections in Iraq, and training companies at installations across the continental United States. She'd seen good soldiers die from bad luck, and bad soldiers survive through dumb fortune. She'd written condolence letters to parents, spouses, and children. She'd carried the weight of command through 3 divorces and 1 near breakdown that she'd never told anyone about. She knew the desert. She knew the mission. And she knew that untested theories from junior enlisted personnel were usually worth exactly what you paid for them. Which was why, when she noticed Private First Class Voss standing in the corner of the TOC at 0615 hours, still hunched over that same damn table with her acetate overlays and thermal imagery, Holt's first instinct was annoyance. PFC Voss. The younger woman looked up. There was something in her eyes, a stillness, a depth that Holt found vaguely unsettling, though she would never have admitted it. Ma'am, we step off in 2 hours and 30 minutes. Shouldn't you be with your squad conducting pre-combat checks? Completed at 0530, ma'am. Sergeant Chin cleared me to conduct additional route analysis. Holt's eyes narrowed. Additional route analysis. Yes, ma'am. And what exactly has your additional route analysis revealed that my operations section missed? It was a challenge, delivered with a precisely calibrated edge that Holt had perfected over 2 decades of dealing with soldiers who thought they were smarter than the room. She expected Voss to stammer, to backpedal, to realize she'd overstepped and retreat into the comfortable safety of nothing, ma'am. Instead, Voss turned the tablet toward her. Kilometer 14, Canyon Route 7 North. For shooters pre-positioned on the east and west walls. 3 in standard positions with overlapping fields of fire, 1 offset by 8 meters to provide acoustic early warning. The offset creates a sound corridor approximately 130 meters long that would detect any dismounted approach from the east. Current operations order doesn't account for this configuration. Holt stared at the screen, then at Voss, then back at the screen. This is speculation. No, ma'am. It's geometry. Thermal signatures could be anything. Animals. Terrain features. Equipment left behind by previous rotations. The signatures show consistent heat bloom patterns indicating human presence over the past 48 hours. The positioning correlates with textbook ambush doctrine modified for canyon terrain. And the offset shooter's location only makes tactical sense if you account for the acoustic properties of the eastern approach. You're telling me you figured out all of this from thermal imagery. And what? A terrain map? Voss paused. Something flickered across her face. Not quite hesitation, but close. I've seen this configuration before, ma'am. Outside Mosul. The geometry is identical. Holt felt her jaw tighten. She'd read Voss's personnel file. She knew about the IED incident, the reduction in rank, the barely concealed recommendation from her previous commander that Voss be given limited responsibility due to her tendency toward unilateral action. In other words, she's good, but she doesn't follow orders. Handle with care. Your assessment has been noted. Private. Ma'am, if we enter that canyon without adjusting our approach. I said noted. Holt's voice carried the weight of her rank, like a physical force. The operations order has been approved by Colonel Reeves. The route has been cleared by the reconnaissance element. And the last thing I need is a demoted specialist playing intelligence analyst, because she's got something to prove. The words landed exactly where Holt intended them. She saw Voss's expression shift. Not anger, not hurt, but something else. Something that looked almost like resignation. Understood, ma'am. Good. Now report to your squad and prepare to move. We roll at 0845. Voss gathered her materials with precise, economical movements. Tablet into cargo pocket. Acetate overlays into her assault pack. Grease pencil tucked behind her ear. Every motion spoke of a discipline so ingrained it had become unconscious. She was almost at the door when Holt spoke again. Private Voss. Voss turned. Ma'am, why are you still doing this? Analysis, preparation, all of it. You're not getting your rank back. You're not getting a recommendation. You're not getting anything except more time in this desert purgatory. So why? For a long moment, Voss didn't answer. When she finally did, her voice was quiet but absolutely certain. Because someone has to see what's coming, ma'am, even if no one listens. She left. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Major Diana Holt stood alone in the Tactical Operations Center, staring at the spot where Voss had been standing, and tried to ignore the uncomfortable feeling settling into her stomach. She'd been in the Army long enough to recognize the look she'd just seen. She'd wore it herself, once, back when she still believed that being right was enough. Back before she'd learned that being right didn't matter if you couldn't make the people above you listen. The operations order was approved. The route was cleared. The convoy would roll. And Cara Voss would be riding in the Fort vehicle, with her tablet and her overlays and her quiet certainty, waiting to see if the desert would prove her right. The sun cracked the eastern horizon at 0625 hours, spilling orange light across the Mojave like blood spreading across a surgical table. Within 15 minutes, the temperature had climbed from a relatively mild 62 degrees to a scorching 78. Within 30 minutes, it would be approaching 90. By noon, the sand would be hot enough to blister exposed skin, and the inside of the vehicles would feel like convection ovens. This was the desert's first lesson. Everything wants to kill you. The heat, the terrain, the isolation. And that was before you added hostile forces with rifles, mortars, and the patience of predators who had been hunting this land for generations. The convoy assembled in the staging area at 0800 hours. 12 vehicles in total. 4 MAT versus providing security, 6 cargo hems loaded with Class 3 and Class V supplies, and 2 M1150 one-up armor Humvees for command and control. 47 soldiers, representing elements from 3 different battalions, all converging for a routine resupply mission that would take them through some of the most challenging terrain in the National Training Center's operating area. Routine was a dangerous word in the desert. Private First Class Voss stood beside Vehicle 4, an MATV with a designation stencil that read Atlas 2-7, and conducted her final equipment check. M4A1 carbine with ACOG sight, function check complete. 6 30-round magazines loaded with M855A1, stowed in pouches across her plate carrier. M67 fragmentation grenades, 2, secured and accessible. Combat knife, sheathed on her left shoulder for cross-draw. Individual first aid kit, tourniquet visible, wound packing kit verified, chest seals in place. She'd added a few non-standard items to her loadout, things she'd learned to carry during her time in Iraq. A pair of trauma shears capable of cutting through seat belts and body armor. 3 chem lights in different colors for signaling. A compact wind meter, barely larger than a pen, that could measure speed and direction with surprising accuracy. And her tablet, still showing the thermal imagery of Canyon Route 7 North, still marked with her handwritten analysis that nobody wanted to see. Voss! She turned. Staff Sergeant Marcus Briggs stood 3 meters away, squinting against the early morning glare. He was a thick-necked man in his mid-30s with a shaved head and the kind of forearms that came from decades of manual labor. He'd been Army for 16 years, deployed 5 times, and earned a reputation as the kind of NCO who would walk through fire for soldiers and expect them to do the same. Sergeant, Chin told me you were up half the night, doing route analysis. Yes, Sergeant. Briggs walked closer, lowering his voice. He also told me you tried to brief Major Holt on some concerns you had. Said she wasn't particularly receptive. Voss kept her expression neutral. The Major has her reasons, Sergeant. I'm sure she does. Briggs paused, studying her face with an intensity that made most soldiers uncomfortable. But I'm asking you, not her. What did you see? For a moment, Voss considered deflecting. She considered giving the safe answer, the political answer, the answer that would keep her head down and her record clean. She'd learned, over 11 hard months, that being right wasn't worth the cost. But then she looked at the soldiers loading into the vehicles around her. 19-year-old Private Torres, who joined the Army to pay for his mother's medical bills. Specialist Keene, a single father with a 3-year-old daughter he video called every night. Sergeant First Class Williams, 60 days from retirement after 22 years of service. 35 lives on Route Tampa. 14 minutes of defiance. One choice that cost her everything and saved everyone. She couldn't make that choice for them, but she could give them the information they needed to make it for themselves. Kilometer 14, she said quietly. 4-man ambush team with overlapping fields of fire. One shooter offset 8 meters to provide acoustic early warning. Standard approach routes are compromised. Current ops order doesn't account for the configuration. Briggs absorbed this information without visible reaction. How confident are you? 93%, Sergeant. The geometry matches a configuration I saw outside Mosul. Same terrain type, same positioning logic. Only variable is the specific personnel involved. And Major Holt knows this? She knows what I told her. She chose not to adjust the plan. Briggs was silent for a long moment. Around them, soldiers continued their pre-combat checks, loading equipment, testing radios, sharing nervous jokes that none of them really found funny. The desert wind was beginning to pick up, carrying fine particles of sand that would work their way into every crack and crevice of their gear. All right, Briggs finally said, here's what we're going to do. You're riding in my vehicle. When we get to kilometer 13, you're going to tell me everything you think is about to happen. And if I think your analysis holds water, we're going to have a very loud conversation with the Major about adjusting our approach. Sergeant, I know what it could do. Briggs met her eyes with a look that contained something she hadn't seen in 11 months. Trust. But I've been doing this job long enough to know when someone's guessing and when someone's seeing. You're not guessing. Voss. And I'm not going to let another convoy roll into a kill zone because some officer was too proud to listen to an E3. Voss felt something shift in her chest. Not hope. She'd learned to be careful with hope. But something close to it. Thank you, Sergeant. Don't thank me yet. If you're wrong, we're both going to be writing a lot of paperwork. If you're right, he paused, a grim smile crossing his face. Well, if you're right, we're going to have a very interesting morning. The convoy rolled out of the staging area at 0845 hours, exactly on schedule. 12 vehicles stretched across 600 meters of desert road, maintaining 50-meter intervals to minimize the impact of any single attack while remaining close enough for mutual support. The lead MATV, designated Warhorse 1-1, carried the route reconnaissance element responsible for identifying threats before the main body encountered them. The trail vehicle, Warhorse 1-4, provided rear security and served as the rapid response element if the convoy was hit from behind. Voss sat in the rear passenger seat of Atlas 2-7, fourth vehicle in the formation. Through the armored glass of the MRAP's windows, she watched the Mojave scroll past like a fever dream. Endless expanses of brown and tan punctuated by the occasional twisted Joshua tree or cluster of creosote bushes. The radio crackled with routine traffic, position updates. Speed adjustments. The endless administrative chatter that defined convoy operations in a combat zone, even when that combat zone was technically American soil. Warhorse 1-1, Atlas 2-7. Position update, kilometer 6.5. All vehicles maintaining interval. No observed threats. Over. Atlas 2-7, Warhorse 1-1. Roger. Continue movement. Out. Voss pulled her tablet from her cargo pocket and called up the route overlay one more time. The canyon entrance was 7.5 kilometers ahead. The suspected ambush site was another 3 kilometers beyond that. 17 minutes at current speed. She checked her wind meter. Northeast at 8 knots. Consistent with her earlier analysis. But the wind in the desert was fickle. It could shift without warning, transforming tactical situations in seconds. She'd need to monitor it constantly as they approached the canyon. You've been staring at that screen for 10 minutes. The voice came from her left, Specialist Reyes, the vehicle's gunner, currently seated and resting before he'd need to man the remote weapon system. What exactly are you looking for? Patterns, Voss replied without looking up. The desert has a rhythm. If you watch long enough, you can see when something's about to break it. That's either profound or crazy. I can't tell which. Both, Briggs said from the front seat. She's both. Keep watching, Voss. Let me know when we hit kilometer 13. The minutes crawled past. The convoy maintained its steady pace, eating up the distance between their starting point and their destination with mechanical efficiency. The vehicles hummed and rumbled. The soldiers inside them tried to stay alert, tried to keep their heads in the game, but the monotony of movement was its own kind of enemy. This was how it always started. The boredom, the routine, the gradual lowering of defenses as nothing happened, and nothing happened, and nothing happened until suddenly everything happened at once. Kilometer 11, Voss announced quietly. The terrain was beginning to change. The flat desert floor was giving way to rising slopes on either side, the first hints of the canyon system that would funnel their movement for the next several kilometers. The walls were still low, barely 10 meters on the eastern side and 15 on the west, but they would grow quickly. By kilometer 14, they'd be surrounded by 60-meter cliffs with no escape routes except forward and back. Kilometer 12. Voss pulled up the thermal imagery one more time, overlaying it with the real-time GPS feed showing the convoy's position. The correlation was precise. The shooters she'd identified in the pre-dawn analysis were positioned exactly where she'd marked them. If they were still there, if they were actually hostile, if any of this was real, 93% confidence, 7% margin of error. 7% was enough to kill everyone in this convoy. Kilometer 13, she said. Sergeant Briggs. I heard you. Briggs keyed his radio. Atlas 2-7 to Warhorse Actual. Request immediate halt at current position for tactical assessment. Over. There was a long pause before Major Holt's voice came back, sharp with irritation. Atlas 2-7. This is Warhorse Actual. Explain the nature of your tactical assessment. We are not on the convoy halt schedule. Over. Briggs looked at Voss. She met his eyes and nodded once. Warhorse Actual, Atlas 2-7. We have credible intelligence indicating possible ambush at kilometer 14. Recommend halting to reassess approach options before entering Canyon Narrows. Over. Atlas 2-7. What is the source of this intelligence? Over. Visual analysis of thermal imaging correlated with terrain features. Same indicators as previous confirmed ambush in Mosul AR. Request permission to brief details in person. Over. Another pause. Longer this time. Atlas 2-7, Warhorse Actual. Permission denied. We have a mission timeline to maintain. Continue movement. Out. Briggs slammed his fist against the dashboard. Damn it. Sergeant. Voss's voice was calm. Check the eastern ridgeline. Kilometer 14.2. Tell me what you see. Briggs grabbed his binoculars and scanned the indicated area. For a long moment, he was silent. Sun flash. He finally said, glass or metal. Someone's up there. That's shooter number 3. The one I marked on the overlay. How did you? Briggs trailed off, shaking his head. Never mind. Okay. New plan. When contact initiates, we'll have approximately 43 seconds before their first reload cycle. Voss interrupted. There's a 7-second lull between cycles when all 4 shooters are reloading simultaneously. That's our window. During that window, I need the convoy to execute a 40-meter retrograde into a terrain depression 200 meters behind our current projected contact point. It creates a visual dead zone that eliminates 3 of the 4 shooters' line of sight. Briggs stared at her. You've already calculated an evasive route. Yes, Sergeant. Based on terrain features that aren't on any official map. The official maps don't account for recent erosion patterns. I cross-reference with satellite imagery from last month's imagery pass. The depression is there. Voss! Who the hell are you? She didn't answer. Through the armored glass, the canyon walls were rising around them, swallowing the sky piece by piece. Kilometer 14 was 90 seconds away. The ambush began at 0902 hours. The sound came first, a sharp crack that echoed off the canyon walls and multiplied into a roar of overlapping reports. Then the impacts, metal screaming as rounds struck the lead vehicle's armored hull. Then the radio traffic, everyone talking at once, voices blending into a chaos of overlapping transmissions. Contact left, Warhorse 1-1 taking effective fire from elevated positions. I see muzzle flashes, Eastern Ridge, bearing 045. Return fire. All vehicles return fire. Voss's mind went cold and clear, the way it always did when the shooting started. Fear was there. It never really left, but it was distant now, pushed the edges of her consciousness while something else took over. Something that saw angles and trajectories instead of chaos. Something that counted seconds instead of praying. 43 seconds. She started to count in her head, tracking the rhythm of the incoming fire. The shooters were disciplined, controlled bursts, staggered timing, maintaining sustained pressure while conserving ammunition. Exactly the pattern she predicted. Sergeant Briggs. She had to shout to be heard over the vehicle's engine and the cacophony of gunfire. The 40-meter retrograde we need to execute now. The Major hasn't authorized. If we wait for authorization, we die in this kill zone. Another burst of fire raked across the convoy. Voss heard a distinctive thunk as a round impacted somewhere on their vehicle's exterior armor. The plates held, but her heart rate spiked anyway. 31 seconds. Briggs grabbed his radio. All Atlas elements. This is Atlas 2-7. Execute emergency retrograde for 0 meters, bearing 180. Move now. Atlas 2-7. This is Warhorse actual. Negative on that retrograde. We hold position and, with respect, ma'am, we execute or we die. All Atlas elements move. The vehicles lurched backward. Drivers who had trained for exactly this kind of emergency didn't wait for the argument to resolve. They heard the authority in Briggs's voice and responded. The massive MAT verses and HEMS reversed in near unison, eating up ground with speed that seemed impossible for vehicles that weighed 20 tons each. 23 seconds. Voss watched the terrain through her window, tracking their position against a mental map she constructed hours ago. The depression was ahead, behind them now, as they reversed. A shallow bowl carved by flash floods that created just enough vertical relief to break line of sight with the elevated shooters. 20 more meters, she shouted. 10, 5, stop. The convoy halted. The incoming fire continued for another second, then sputtered. The shooters had lost their angles. 3 of the 4 were firing blind now, their rounds impacting the canyon walls above and behind the convoy's new position. 7 seconds. Reload cycle starting now. Voss was already moving, popping her door and dropping to the desert floor in a controlled fall. Sergeant Briggs, I need Keene and Torres with me. We have a window. Voss, what the hell are you? The stream bed, eastern approach. 130 meters of sound cover if we move during the reload. She was already running, not waiting for permission, trusting that someone would follow. The wind. She'd been tracking it since kilometer 11, watching it shift from northeast to southwest, waiting for the pattern to establish itself. At 0918 hours, 16 minutes from now, the shift would complete and the sound corridor would become their approach route. But she didn't have 16 minutes. She had 6 seconds left in this reload cycle, and if they could reach the stream bed before the firing resumed, footsteps behind her. Keene and Torres, moving without question, trusting her for reasons they probably couldn't articulate. 2 seconds. Voss dove into the stream bed, a shallow channel carved into the canyon floor that was invisible from the elevated positions. Keen and Torres landed beside her. Breathing hard, weapons up, the firing resumed. Rounds cracked overhead, searching for targets, finding only rock and sand. "We're in their blind spot," Voss whispered. The stream bed runs parallel to the western wall for 130 meters before it angles toward their positions. If we move during wind gusts, the sound of our movement will be masked. We can flank them. "How do you know this?" Torres demanded, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "Because I've been watching, Private." Voss checked her wind meter. 6 knots southwest. Close enough. When I say move, you move. When I say freeze, you freeze. No questions. No hesitation. Understood? 2 nods. 2 soldiers trusting their lives to a demoted private who saw things nobody else could see. Move. They went low and fast, using the stream bed's shallow walls for cover. The wind gusted, carrying their footsteps into the background noise of the desert. 50 meters. 75. 100. Freeze. The wind died. They pressed themselves against a sun-heated rock and waited, barely breathing, while seconds stretched into eternities. Move. 20 meters to the angle point. The stream bed curved west here, climbing gradually toward the position where Voss had marked the third shooter, the one she'd spotted through Briggs's binoculars. From there, they'd have flanking angles on all 4 hostiles. Freeze. A sound from above. Boots on rock. Someone repositioning. Voss held up a fist. "Stop. Don't breathe. Don't exist." The sound faded. The shooter had moved, but not toward them. Move. Final push. Go. They exploded from the stream bed and into the open, covering the last 20 meters in a dead sprint that left no time for fear or hesitation. Voss saw the first shooter, a man in desert camouflage, prone behind a rock formation, focused entirely on the convoy below, and she didn't hesitate. 3 rounds. Center mass. The shooter dropped. Keen and Torres split to her left and right, engaging the second and third shooters before they could react to the unexpected threat from their flank. The disciplined ambush dissolved into chaos as the hunters became the hunted. 4 seconds later, it was over. 3 shooters down. 1, the fourth, the offset position, had vanished. Where's number 4? Torres scanned the ridgeline, weapon sweeping. Voss was already moving, running toward the last known position, reading the terrain, calculating. There, a trail of disturbed sand leading toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. The shooter was running. Contact, bearing 090. She dropped to a knee, steadied her rifle, and tracked the fleeing figure. The range was extreme, nearly 300 meters, but the target was silhouetted against the morning sky. She squeezed the trigger. Once, twice, 3 times. The figure stumbled, fell, and didn't rise. The immediate threat was neutralized, but Voss knew better than to relax. Atlas 2 to 7, this is flanking element. 4 hostile confirmed down. Checking for secondaries. She keyed her radio while maintaining overwatch on the kill zone below. Convoy status? Briggs's voice came back, rough with relief. All vehicles operational. 2 casualties, minor wounds, already receiving treatment. Good work, Voss. Don't thank me yet. That was too clean. What do you mean? 4 shooters with overlapping fire on a 12-vehicle convoy. That's a containment force, not an assault element. They were fixing us in position for something else. The words had barely left her mouth when the first mortar round impacted. The explosion detonated 60 meters behind the rear vehicle, throwing a column of sand and debris into the air. A second round followed 3 seconds later, this one closer, 40 meters, maybe less. The third round would find them if they didn't move. Mortars, all elements, execute immediate displacement. Move forward, not back. They're walking rounds toward the rear. The convoy lurched into motion, vehicles accelerating to the kill zone they'd just escaped. More rounds fell, each one closer to the last position, each one confirming that whoever was directing this attack had eyes on the convoy's movement. Where's the tube? Briggs demanded over the radio. We need to suppress that position. Voss scrambled along the ridgeline, using the elevated position the dead shooters had occupied to scan the terrain beyond the canyon. The mortar team would need line of sight to adjust fire effectively. They'd be somewhere on the southern approach, probably positioned on one of the mesa features that dominated the landscape 600 to 800 meters out. There, a flicker of movement, followed by a puff of white smoke. Contact bearing 148. Distance 600 to 800 meters. I have visual on mortar position. That's beyond effective rifle range, Keene said, dropping beside her. We need crew-served weapons. Atlas 2 to 7. Do we have an MK-19 on any vehicle? Voss was already calculating. The Mark 19 grenade launcher had a maximum effective range of 1,500 meters against area targets. If they could get in position, negative on the MK-19. Warhorse 1 to 2 has an M2 mounted, but that's 800 meters max effective, and they'd need to expose the vehicle to return fire. Another mortar round impacted. This one was closer to the convoy's new position. They were adjusting faster than she'd anticipated. I have an idea. Voss grabbed her radio. Warhorse Actual. This is Private First Class Voss on Atlas 2 to 7 Tactical Net. Request immediate authentication for Contingency Protocol Black Frost. I say again, requesting Black Frost authentication. Silence on the radio. Then Briggs's voice confused. Black Frost? Voss, what are you talking about? There's no protocol by that. Warhorse Actual. Major Holt's voice cut through the chatter, hard and sharp. Private Voss, identify yourself and state your authority for that request. Ma'am, my authority is Tier 1, Authenticated Channel 77 Delta. Call sign Iron Wolf. Requesting Black Frost immediate action package for fire support on target bearing 148, range 700 meters. The silence that followed was different, heavier, like the entire tactical net was holding its breath. When Major Holt spoke again, her voice had changed. The dismissive irritation was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like shock. Iron Wolf, confirm your last. You're claiming Tier 1 authentication authority. Confirmed, ma'am. Authentication protocol is legacy from Operation Night Shepherd. Tasking from SOC J3. I was attached to a direct action element before my current assignment. Black Frost is a prepositioned asset package, including precision mortar capability. I need you to make that call right now, or this convoy is going to take casualties. Another mortar round. This one impacted 15 meters from Warhorse 1 to 4, the trail vehicle. Someone was screaming over the radio. Shrapnel wound, non-critical but bleeding badly. Ma'am, Voss pressed, I'm telling you the truth. Verify with higher if you want to verify after, but right now I need that call. 5 seconds of silence. Then, all elements. This is Warhorse Actual. Break contact and continue forward movement. Black Frost is authorized. The effect was immediate. From somewhere to the north, beyond the canyon, beyond the kill zone, beyond anything the convoy could see, there was a distant thump, then another, then a third. 6 seconds later, the mesa where Voss had spotted the mortar team erupted in a cascading series of explosions. 60 millimeters precision rounds, GPS guided, landing with devastating accuracy on a target that had been pre-registered and prepared for exactly this kind of contingency. The mortar fire stopped. Mortar element neutralized, Voss reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Recommend immediate extraction from the AO before additional threats develop. Roger that. Major Holt's voice was different now. Quieter. All elements. Continue movement to waypoint Bravo. We're getting out of this canyon. The convoy moved. Voss watched from her elevated position until the last vehicle cleared the kill zone, then began the long scramble down to rejoin her unit. Keene fell into step beside her. Iron Wolf, old call sign, and Black Frost, contingency package, preposition assets for high-value missions that might need emergency support. They put them in place before rotations and briefed certain personnel on how to access them. Personnel like demoted specialists who supposedly work in a support role. Voss didn't answer. Her silence said everything. Who are you, Voss? Really, I'm the same person I've been since I got here. Specialist. Just with a slightly more complicated history. They walked the rest of the way in silence. The convoy reached waypoint Bravo at 0947 hours, 42 minutes after the ambush had begun, 17 minutes after precision strike that ended it. The waypoint was a logistic staging area cut into a natural depression in the desert, protected on 3 sides by gentle slopes and accessible only through a single controlled approach. Security elements fanned out to establish perimeter, while medical personnel rushed to treat the wounded. The chaos of the ambush was giving way to the organized chaos of aftermath. Voss dismounted from her vehicle and stood for a moment, letting the tension drain from her muscles. Her hands were steady. They always were, during and after, but she could feel the crash coming. The post-contact letdown that would leave her exhausted and hollow until sleep reset her system. Not yet. There was still work to do. Private Voss. She turned. Major Holt was walking toward her with a kind of deliberate stride that usually preceded an eschewing of legendary proportions. Briggs moved to intercept, but Holt waved him off without breaking eye contact with Voss. Ma'am. Holt stopped 2 meters away. Her face was unreadable. The professional mask that senior officers wore when they were processing information that didn't fit their assumptions. Iron Wolf, she said quietly. Tier 1 authenticated. Direct action element attached to JSOC. And you've been sitting in my convoy, riding as a PFC for the past 3 weeks. Yes, ma'am. The IED incident. That wasn't just some reckless E for playing hero, was it? You knew exactly what you were doing because you've been trained to do it. Voss hesitated. The truth was classified. Deeply, thoroughly classified. But this was a moment where lies would only make things worse. I was attached to a special operations unit for 14 months, ma'am. EOD cross-training was part of my skill development. When I saw the device on Route Tampa, I recognized the configuration and knew the timeline. The rest, she shrugged, the rest is what's in my file. Your file is a cover story. Parts of it are accurate. The demotion was real. The reduction in rank was real. I did violate orders, and I did face administrative action. Just not for the reasons everyone assumes. Holt was silent for a long moment. Around them, the staging area hummed with activity. Soldiers checking equipment, medics treating wounds, commanders coordinating the next phase of movement. None of them seemed to notice the conversation happening in their midst. Why didn't you tell me this morning? When you came to me with your analysis, why didn't you just explain who you were? Would you have believed me, ma'am? The question hung in the air. Holt's expression flickered. Something that might have been shame or anger or both. Probably not, she admitted finally. A demoted PFC claiming Tier 1 credentials would have sounded like either a lie or a mental break. I would have dismissed you even faster than I did. That's why I didn't say anything. I hoped the analysis would speak for itself. And when it didn't, I prepared contingencies. Voss allowed herself a small, tired smile. That's what I do, ma'am. I see what's coming, and I prepare for the outcomes most people won't consider. Holt absorbed this. Her jaw worked, processing implications that went far beyond the single convoy or the single ambush. The mortar strike, she said slowly. Black Frost. That wasn't just an emergency call. You knew that asset package existed because you helped plan this rotation. You anticipate a possibility of exactly this kind of attack, position the response capability in advance. And then what? Waited to see if you'd need to use it. Pre-mission analysis indicated a 37% probability of organized hostile action along Canyon Route 7. The terrain profiles matched known ambush configurations from multiple historical engagements. I flagged the concern through channels, but a recommendation was overruled at the planning level. So I made sure backup options existed. You went over everyone's head. I went around everyone's head, ma'am. There's a difference. The chain of command made their decision. I simply ensured that decision wouldn't get people killed if it turned out to be wrong. Holt stared at her. The professional mask was cracking now, revealing something more complex underneath. Frustration? Certainly, but also a grudging respect that she clearly didn't want to feel. You should have been court-martialed for that. Circumventing the chain of command, appropriating classified resources, operating outside your assigned role. Yes, ma'am. But if you hadn't done it, we'd be calling in medevac for a lot more than minor shrapnel wounds right now. Yes, ma'am. So, what am I supposed to do with that? With you? Voss met her eyes. Whatever you think is right, ma'am. I've never asked for special treatment. I don't expect it now. All I've ever done is try to keep people alive. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty. The wind gusted across the staging area, carrying the acrid smell of burnt propellant and scorched metal. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter was approaching, probably the promised medevac for the wounded. The desert was settling back into its ancient silence, indifferent to the violence that had just scarred its surface. Holt turned and walked away without another word. Voss watched her go, then let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Staff Sergeant Briggs found her 20 minutes later, sitting on the rear bumper of Atlas 2-7 with her tablet in her lap. She was updating her terrain analysis, marking the ambush site with red notation, and adding lessons learned that might save lives on future operations. "You should be resting," Briggs said, dropping onto the bumper beside her. "So should you." "Fair point." He was quiet for a moment, watching the activity around them. "Heard you had a conversation with the Major. You could call it that. She told me about Iron Wolf, about the JSOC attachment, and the Tier 1 stuff." Briggs paused. "Said you've been hiding in plain sight this whole time." "I wasn't hiding, Sergeant. I was doing my job. The job I was assigned, with the rank I was given, in the unit I was sent to. The other stuff, that's history. History that saved 47 lives today." Voss closed her tablet. 46. Private Torres caught some frag during the initial contact. Minor wound, but he's going home early. 46 people who would be dead or captured if we'd rolled through that canyon without your analysis. Briggs shook his head. "I've been in the Army 16 years, Voss. I've seen a lot of soldiers with special skills and classified backgrounds. Most of them can't wait to tell you how important they are. You're the first one I've ever met who just shut up and did the work. The work is what matters, not the recognition." "You really believe that?" She looked at him then, and something in her eyes made him understand that the question was rhetorical. "I used to care about rank, Sergeant, about advancement and recognition, and all the things they tell you to care about in training. Then I spent 14 months in a world where none of that mattered, where the only thing that mattered was whether the person next to you was alive at the end of the operation. Everything else, it's just noise." Briggs was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, more personal. "I was there, you know, Route Tampa. Not in your convoy, but nearby. My unit was the QRF that was supposed to respond if anything went wrong. We got the call that an IED had been neutralized by an unauthorized personnel action, and by the time we arrived, it was all over. 35 people walking around who should have been dead, and one young specialist standing in the middle of the road looking like she'd just run a marathon." Voss went very still. "I didn't know who you were then," Briggs continued. "Just another face in another convoy that got lucky. But I remember what the EOD tech said after he examined the device. He said whoever disarmed it knew exactly what they were doing, the kind of knowledge that takes years to develop and most people never master. And he said that if she'd been 1 second slower or 1 millimeter off, there wouldn't have been enough left to identify." The tech was exaggerating. "No, he wasn't." Briggs turned to face her fully. "I looked up the after-action report after I found out who you were. The device had 3 separate fail-safes, each one designed to defeat standard disposal techniques. You bypassed all of them in 14 minutes, under fire, without any specialized equipment. That's not luck, Voss. That's not even skill. That's something else." "What is it then?" "I don't know." He smiled slightly. "But I know this. When we get back to Garrison, I'm going to personally walk into the battalion commander's office and tell him what happened today. Not the classified parts. I'm not stupid. But the parts that matter, the analysis you did, the tactics you called, the lives you saved. And then I'm going to recommend that your reduction in rank be reversed immediately with prejudice against anyone who argues otherwise. Sergeant, I'm not finished. I'm also going to recommend you for the Army Commendation Medal with V device for valor. And if Major Holt has a problem with any of that, she can take it up with me directly." Voss felt something crack inside her, a wall she built 11 months ago. When the verdict came down and she'd accepted that her career was over, she'd told herself it didn't matter. She'd told herself the work was enough. But it wasn't. It had never been. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why does it matter to you?" Briggs looked out at the desert, at the convoy that had survived, at the soldiers who would go home to their families because one quiet private had refused to stop thinking. "Because I've seen what happens when the Army punishes people for doing the right thing," he said. "I've seen it break good soldiers. I've seen it destroy careers and marriages and lives. And I've seen it happen to people who deserve better, People who would just try and keep their teams alive in a world that doesn't care about regulations or procedures or chain of command. He turned back to her. I'm not going to let that happen to you, Voss. Not if I can help it. Not this time. The wind died. The desert went quiet. And for the first time in 11 months, Private First Class Cara Voss allowed herself to hope. The convoy returned to Fort Irwin at 1,347 hours, 6 hours behind schedule, and carrying 3 wounded soldiers who would make full recoveries. The mission was logged as a training exercise with complications, the kind of bureaucratic euphemism that concealed the reality of what had happened in that canyon. But some things couldn't be concealed. Within 48 hours, the after-action reports had reached Forscom. Within 72 hours, inquiries were being made at the highest levels of training and doctrine command about a certain private first class who had demonstrated unusual tactical awareness during a simulated combat scenario. Within 96 hours, a flag officer with more stars than Voss had ever seen in person was requesting a private briefing on a Canyon Route 7 incident, and the soldier who had predicted it. Voss sat through it all with the same quiet patience she'd maintained for 11 months. She answered questions honestly, provided documentation when requested, and declined to speculate about matters that remained classified. She was, in every way, the perfect picture of a professional soldier who had done her job and expected nothing in return. But things were changing. It started small, a nod from officers who had previously looked through her like she didn't exist. A request from the S-3 shop for input on route planning for future operations. An invitation to brief the battalion commander on tactical analysis techniques that might benefit other units. Then it became larger. 2 weeks after the ambush, Voss received orders to report to brigade headquarters at 0900 hours. No explanation was provided. No indication of whether she was being rewarded or punished or something in between. She dressed in her best uniform, the one she saved for boards and ceremonies and occasions that mattered, and drove across posts with a kind of calm acceptance that came from having made peace with whatever was about to happen. The brigade commander, Colonel William Reeves, was waiting for her in his office. So was Major Diana Holt. So were 3 other officers Voss didn't recognize, all wearing the subdued insignia of Special Operations Commands that preferred anonymity to recognition. Private First Class Voss. Please sit down. She sat. Colonel Reeves studied her for a long moment, then slid a folder across his desk. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing seals and signatures she recognized. This arrived this morning from HQDA, he said. It's a recommendation for immediate restoration of your previous rank, with full backdating of time and grade and elimination of all adverse administrative actions from your personnel record. Voss looked at the paper. The words blurred slightly, and she realized her eyes were wet. The recommendation is endorsed by JSOC, supported by TRADIC, and approved by the Secretary of the Army. Reeves continued. Effective immediately, you are Specialist Cara Voss. Effective 30 days from now, pending completion of board requirements, you will be Sergeant Cara Voss. She couldn't speak. 11 months of silence, of acceptance, of being the soldier nobody wanted to see. And now, in a single moment, all of it was being undone. There's more, Major Holt said quietly. She looked different than she had in the TOC that morning. Softer, somehow, as if the edges that had defined her had been smoothed by something she'd seen. The officers behind you are from SOX Assessment and Selection Cadre. They've been watching your progress since you arrived at Fort Irwin. What happened in that canyon? It confirmed what they already suspected. We want you back, Specialist Voss. One of the anonymous officers spoke for the first time, a woman with Colonel's eagles and eyes that had seen things beyond imagination. Your previous assignment was terminated due to circumstances beyond your control, but your capabilities remain undiminished. The community needs people like you. The community, Voss's voice was hoarse. You mean? We mean the people who operate in places that don't exist, against enemies who officially don't threaten us, using methods that will never be acknowledged. We mean the mission you were born for. The colonel paused. We're offering you a choice, Specialist. You can accept the rank restoration, remain at Fort Irwin, and continue your career through conventional channels. Or you can come back to us. The room waited. Voss looked at the paper in her hands. The restoration of everything she'd lost, the vindication she told herself she didn't need. She looked at Major Holt, who had dismissed her that morning and was now sitting in silence, no longer fighting against what she could no longer deny. She looked at the officers behind her, representatives of a world she left behind and had never expected to see again. And then she looked at her own hands, steady, capable, marked with calluses from weapons and tools and the work that had defined her entire adult life. "Before I answer," she said slowly, "I need to know something." "Ask." "The people who reduced my rank, the ones who decided I should be punished for saving 35 lives on Route Tampa, are they still making those decisions? Are they still in positions where they can do the same thing to someone else?" The colonel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. One of them has been reassigned to a position with significantly reduced authority. 2 others are under investigation for unrelated matters that may result in administrative action. The 4th, a slight pause, the 4th retired last month, voluntarily. So the system is correcting itself. The system is being corrected. There's a difference. The colonel leaned forward. "The people who punish you made a mistake. Specialist Voss. A mistake that cost the community one of its most effective operators and nearly cost you your career. We don't forget those mistakes, and we don't repeat them." Voss was silent for a long moment. The weight of the decision pressed against her chest. The conventional path, safe and predictable, versus the shadow she'd walked before and might never leave again. But she already knew the answer. She'd known it since the moment she'd opened her eyes that morning in the TOC and seen the thermal imagery of Canyon Route 7. She'd known it since Route Tampa, since the 14 minutes that had changed everything, since the moment she'd chosen lives over permission and accepted the consequences. "I'll come back," she said, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "The people I serve with today, Briggs, Keene, Torres, the others, they don't get forgotten because I disappear into a classified program. Whatever recognition they've earned, they receive. Whatever support they need, they get. And if any of them face the kind of administrative persecution I faced," her voice hardened, "I want to know about it, so I can do something about it." The colonel smiled. It was the first genuine expression Voss had seen on her face. Done. The sun was setting over Fort Irwin when Voss finally walked out of brigade headquarters. No longer private first class. No longer the invisible soldier carrying the weight of someone else's judgment. The desert glowed orange and red, the same colors that had greeted her that morning when everything had still been uncertain. But the desert looked different now. The weight was gone. Staff Sergeant Briggs was waiting by her vehicle. He'd changed out his combat uniform and into the civilian clothes he wore off-duty. Jeans, a faded concert t-shirt, work boots that had seen better decades. He looked like any other soldier enjoying the California evening. He also looked like he'd been crying. "They told you," Voss said. "They told me." Briggs cleared his throat. "Specialist Voss. Sergeant-Select Voss. Whatever you're going by now. Just Voss. For the moment. Just Voss." He nodded. "That works." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The training area stretched out before them. Endless miles of desert that had swallowed armies and spat them back out changed. The place where soldiers learned what they were capable of and sometimes learned what they weren't. "I'm leaving," Voss said finally. "Not immediately, but soon. Back to what I was doing before. The classified stuff." "Yeah, the classified stuff." Briggs nodded again. He didn't ask questions. 16 years in the Army had taught him when not to ask questions, but his expression said he understood more than she'd explicitly told him. "The convoy commander," he said, "Major Holt. She stopped me on my way out here. Asked me to give you a message." "What message?" She said she was wrong. This morning in the TOC, when she dismissed your analysis, she said she was wrong, and she knew she was wrong, and she did it anyway because admitting you might be right meant admitting she might be inadequate. And she said, Briggs paused, his voice roughening. She said she'll spend the rest of her career trying to earn back the trust she broke. Starting now, Voss absorbed this. The vindication she told herself she didn't need, delivered through a proxy she'd only known for 3 weeks. What did you tell her? I told her that Kara Voss didn't hold grudges, that she understood the way to command and the impossible choices that came with it, and that the best way to earn back trust wasn't to apologize for the past. It was to do better in the future. You said all that? Briggs shrugged. I may have Paraphrased, the sentiment was accurate. The sun touched the horizon, splitting into layers of light that painted the desert in colors that didn't have names. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, the lonely sound of a predator acknowledging the end of another day. "Thank you, Sergeant," Voss said quietly, "for believing me when nobody else did, for putting your career on the line to support someone you barely knew, for—" she struggled to find the words, "for seeing me when everyone else just saw a punishment." "I didn't see a punishment." Briggs turned to face her fully. "I saw a soldier who refused to let other people's failures define her mission. I saw someone who cared more about doing the right thing than about whether it would be rewarded. I saw Iron Wolf. You didn't know I was Iron Wolf until today." "No, but I knew you were something. The first time I watched you analyze that thermal imagery before dawn, when nobody else was paying attention, I knew you were someone worth trusting. The rest was just details." The sun slipped below the horizon. The desert began its transformation from oven to freezer, the temperature dropping with a kind of dramatic speed that only happened in places where humans weren't supposed to live. Voss extended her hand. Briggs took it. "When this is all over," she said, "when I'm done with whatever comes next, I'm going to find you, and I'm going to buy you the most expensive drink in whatever city you happen to be in, and I'm going to tell you things I can't tell you now. I'll hold you to that. You should." They stood there for a moment longer, two soldiers silhouetted against the dying light, connected by bonds that transcended rank and regulation, and the bureaucratic machinery that tried so hard to reduce human beings to numbers on a roster. Then Voss got in her vehicle and drove away. Briggs watched until her taillights disappeared into the gathering darkness. Then he turned and walked toward the barracks, carrying a memory that would stay with him for the rest of his life. 6 months later, a classified operation in a country that didn't officially host American forces ended with the rescue of 12 hostages who had been given up for dead. The after-action report, filed under seal and accessible only to personnel with the highest clearances, noted that the mission's success was attributable in large part to exceptional tactical analysis provided by attached personnel. The attached personnel wasn't named. But somewhere in that report, buried in a footnote that most readers would never notice, was a reference to a call sign that had become legendary in certain circles. Iron Wolf. She'd returned to the shadows. She'd returned to the work that mattered. And she'd done it without fanfare, without recognition, without any of the ceremonies and awards that other soldiers craved. Because Kara Voss had never needed those things. She'd never needed the uniform, the rank, or the permission of people who didn't understand what she was capable of. All she'd ever needed was the mission, the chance to see what others couldn't see, the opportunity to stand between innocent people and the darkness that wanted to swallow them, and the knowledge, unspoken, unacknowledged, but absolute, that when the radio called for Iron Wolf, she would answer. Always. Staff Sergeant Marcus Briggs received a package 6 months and 3 days after the ambush at Canyon Route 7. Inside was a bottle of scotch older than he was, a handwritten note that said simply, "I owe you one more," and a photograph of a sunrise over a desert that looked nothing like the Mojave. He kept the photograph on his desk for the rest of his career. And every time someone asked him about it, about the woman in the corner of the frame, her face turned away from the camera, her silhouette unmistakable to anyone who had ever seen her in action, he told the same story. "That's Iron Wolf," he'd say. "She saved my life once, and then she disappeared to save someone else's." And that was the truth. The only truth that mattered. The desert doesn't forgive mistakes. It swallows them whole, buries them under layers of heat and sand and silence, and waits for the next fool to wander into its killing ground. But sometimes, just sometimes, the desert meets someone who refuses to be swallowed. Someone who sees the danger before it strikes. Someone who prepares while others assume. Someone who chooses lives over permission, mission over recognition, sacrifice over safety. Someone like Kara Voss, someone like Iron Wolf. And when that happens, the desert learns a lesson it doesn't often learn. Some people can't be buried. Some people rise.